Okay, the reason I'm not reading this, people, is because I'm in school right now, and I'm working on some stuff, so yeah.
Got it. You want Amazing Spider-Man number 3, Part 2, The Bugle. Told as one long flowing story again. No cuts, chapters, or panels. Picking up right after Spider-Man vs. Bad Guys Part 1. This issue focuses on J. Jonah Jameson's crusade against Spider-Man, the growing media storm, and the moment Mac Gargan proposes his plan that will eventually turn him into the Scorpion. Here's the full cinematic narrative. Amazing Spider-Man number 3, The Bugle. Morning sunlight spilled across the jagged skyline of Manhattan, bouncing off glass towers and shimmering against the river as the city yawned awake. Inside the Daily Bugle, the world didn't wait for dawn to begin. Phones rang, typewriters clacked, and the constant smell of coffee and ink hung thick in the air. On the top floor, in an office that was as much a battlefield as a workplace, J. Jonah Jameson was already in full swing. "Where's my copy on the Vulture story?" he bellowed, cigar smoke curling around his words like storm clouds. And who in blazes wrote this line? Spider-Man saves the city again? Saves? He's the reason we've got lunatics flying around in metal feathers in the first place. He slammed a fist on his desk, scattering papers like startled pigeons. Betty Brant, his long-suffering secretary, sighed as she leaned against the doorway with her notepad. "Mr. Jameson, the reporters are still checking the police files." And that line came from Parker's photo caption. "Parker," Jameson barked, spinning around. "Get in here, kid." Peter Parker poked his head through the doorway, the same calm, polite expression masking the exhaustion behind his eyes. He was fresh from Midtown High, his camera hanging from his neck and his backpack slung over one shoulder. "You called, Mr. Jameson?" "Don't play innocent with me, Parker. You think you're clever, huh? Making that wall-crawling menace look like some kind of hero?" Peter raised his hands. "Hey, I just take the pictures, sir. You're the one who writes the headlines." Jameson scowled, pacing behind his desk. "I'll tell you what Spider-Man is. A walking disaster. He shows up, and suddenly we've got flying old men in bird suits, walking sandstorms, armored rhinos, and jewel thieves with claws. Coincidence? I don't think so." He jabbed a finger at a wall of framed newspapers. Each front page screamed another confrontation. Spider-Man versus the Sandman. Masked menace in Midtown sky battle. Black Cat strikes again. City in chaos as Rhino rampages. Jameson puffed on his cigar and continued, his voice sharp with conviction. "Ever since this Spider-Man showed up, crime's gone through the roof. He's not saving New York. He's making it worse. These freaks see him swinging around in tights and think they can join the circus. The man's a menace, Parker, and mark my words, one day everyone will see it." Peter stood silently, biting back a dozen thoughts he could never say. If only Jameson knew how many times Spider-Man had risked his life for this city, how many people he'd saved from those same villains. But to argue would only feed the fire. So Peter did what he always did. He smiled faintly, nodded, and pretended the words didn't sting. Jameson paced back to his window, looking down at the bustling city below. "We need proof, solid proof that Spider-Man's behind all this chaos. Pictures, evidence, something that'll convince the public he's the real threat here." I'll see what I can do," Peter said quietly, edging toward the door. "Don't just see. Do it." Jameson barked, slamming his fist down again. "And somebody get me coffee that doesn't taste like shoe polish." Betty rolled her eyes, muttering something about ulcers under her breath as she followed Peter out. The newsroom hummed with tension as Peter slipped through the doors, wondering, not for the first time, how much longer he could keep this double life from collapsing. But Jameson's storm wasn't over. Hours later, after most of the staff had left for lunch and the city had settled into its noisy rhythm, the elevator doors opened again with a sharp ding. A man stepped out, tall, lean, with eyes that burned with ambition and something darker beneath. Mac Gargan. "Mr. Jameson," he said smoothly, stepping into the office. "Got a minute?" Jameson looked up, sizing him up. "Gargan, you the private investigator I hired last month to track down Spider-Man's hideout?" "That's me," Gargan said, smirking slightly as he closed the office door behind him. "You wanted results. I got some ideas." Jameson leaned back, puffing his cigar thoughtfully. "Ideas don't sell papers, Gargan. I need action." "Oh, I can give you action," Gargan replied. "You keep talking about how Spider-Man's a menace, how he's bad for this city. You want him gone, right?" Really gone? Jameson's eyes narrowed. You're saying what I think you're saying? I'm saying, Gargan continued, lowering his voice, that with the right resources, I can make that happen. I've got contacts, scientists who've been working on enhancement tech, experimental stuff. You give me the funding, I'll get the equipment. You'll get your headline, Mr. Jameson. Spider-Man finally stopped. For a long moment, the room was silent, except for the hum of the city outside. Jameson turned away, staring out the window at the sprawl of New York. He thought of the photos, Spider-Man swinging heroically between towers, the people cheering him, the kids buying masks, the endless headlines that glorified the vigilante while the Bugle struggled to keep control of the narrative. Finally, he spoke. You really think you can take him down? Gargan smiled, a cruel, confident smile. I don't think, Jonah. I know. Jameson's jaw tightened, the conflict flickering in his eyes before resolve hardened his face. How much? Gargan's grin widened. Enough to change the city. Jameson pulled open his desk drawer, slid a checkbook across the table, and lit another cigar. Fine, but if this goes south, it's on your head. Spider-Man's made a fool of this city long enough. It's time someone put him in his place. Gargan picked up the check, his eyes glinting as he slipped it into his coat. Don't worry, Mr. Jameson. By the time I'm done, Spider-Man won't be a problem anymore. As Gargan left the office, the door closing softly behind him, Jameson sat back in his chair, staring at the skyline once more. The setting sun cast long shadows across the city, painting the skyscrapers in orange and gold. He didn't know what Gargan planned, but part of him didn't care. All that mattered was the story, the truth as he saw it, and in his mind, Spider-Man would never be a hero. Down in the streets below, unaware of the storm about to break over him, Spider-Man swung between the towers, the evening wind rushing past his mask. To him, it was just another night in New York, another patrol, another promise to keep. But in the city's underbelly, forces were beginning to move, fueled by greed, jealousy, and vengeance. And soon, the hunter would become the hunted. The city lights flickered on one by one, and high above the Daily Bugle's towering letters, the red neon glow spelled the headline that would define Peter Parker's next trial: Spider-Man Menace or Miracle. The answer, as always, would come at a cost. Would you like the next issue, Amazing Spider-Man number 4, The Sting?
And here is the final part of Amazing Spider-Man number 3.
Amazing Spider-Man number 3, part 3, The First Date. The neon sign of Mickey's Diner buzzed a friendly, old-fashioned hello into the humid evening, a tiny island of warmth on a busy avenue. Inside, the booths were vinyl, and the jukebox played a soft, familiar tune that wrapped around the clink of coffee cups and the low murmur of conversation. Peter Parker smoothed his hair with shaking fingers and checked the strap of his camera out of habit, because old habits were hard to break. Then swallowed and glanced across the diner toward the door. When Gwen Stacy walked in, the whole world seemed to fold politely around her. Her hair fell in a careful halo, her smile was effortless, and she moved like someone who had not yet learned to be guarded against disappointment. Peter felt the old rush in his chest that always arrived when he saw her, equal parts certainty and terror. He stood up, knocking his knee against the booth as he did, and managed Amazing Spider-Man number 3. Part 3, The First Date. The neon sign of Mickey's Diner buzzed a friendly, old-fashioned hello into the humid evening, a tiny island of warmth on a busy avenue. Inside, the booths were vinyl and the jukebox played a soft, familiar tune that wrapped around the clink of coffee cups and the low murmur of conversation. Peter Parker smoothed his hair with shaking fingers and checked the strap of his camera out of habit, because old habits were hard to break. Then swallowed and glanced across the diner toward the door. When Gwen Stacy walked in, the whole world seemed to fold politely around her. Her hair fell in a careful halo, her smile was effortless, and she moved like someone who had not yet learned to be guarded against disappointment. Peter felt the old rush in his chest that always arrived when he saw her, equal parts certainty and terror. He stood up, knocking his knee against the booth as he did, and managed a Amazing Spider-Man number 3, Part 3, The First Date. The neon sign of Mickey's Diner buzzed a friendly old-fashioned hello into the humid evening, a tiny island of warmth on a busy avenue. Inside, the booths were vinyl, and the jukebox played a soft, familiar tune that wrapped around the clink of coffee cups and the low murmur of conversation. Peter Parker smoothed his hair with shaking fingers and checked the strap of his camera out of habit, because old habits were hard to break, then swallowed and glanced across the diner toward the door. When Gwen Stacy walked in, the whole world seemed...
The whole world seemed to fold around. I'll get it in a minute. Hang on.
Amazing Spider-Man number 3, Part 3, The First Date. The neon sign of Mickey's Diner buzzed a friendly, old-fashioned hello into the humid evening, a tiny island of warmth on a busy avenue. Inside, the booths were vinyl and the jukebox played a soft, familiar tune that wrapped around the clink of coffee cups and the low murmur of conversation. Peter Parker smoothed his hair with shaking fingers and checked the strap of his camera out of habit, because old habits were hard to break, then swallowed and glanced across the diner toward the door. When Gwen Stacy walked in, the whole world seemed to fold politely around her. Her hair fell in a careful halo, her smile was effortless, and she moved like someone who had not yet learned to be guarded against disappointment. Peter felt the old rush in his chest that always arrived when he saw her, equal parts certainty and terror. He stood up, knocking his knee against the booth as he did, and managed a lopsided grin that Gwen returned with a laugh that chased his nerves away. They were teenagers in a diner, nothing more and everything more, two people who liked each other and didn't yet know how to speak the full measure of what that meant. They ordered milkshakes and shared fries, traded jokes about school and exams, and Peter, who could talk for hours about photos or quantum mechanics or the oddities of web fluid viscosity, kept his words small and gentle, letting Gwen steer the conversation. He loved the way she listened, the way her eyebrows lifted at some small observation, the way she made him feel less hurried, less broken. "How's Drive? Connor's doing?" Gwen asked, genuinely curious, and Peter found himself surprised at how quickly he answered. "He's good. In the lab most of the time. He's got this quiet strength, you know. He teaches like he believes in second chances." He talked about Kurt Connors not as a hero returned but as a man trying to be whole, and Gwen's eyes softened. She told him about classes and the paper she was writing on Renaissance art, mentioning, by accident, a line that made Peter laugh and worry in the same breath. They traded confidence with the easy rhythm of two people getting to know each other. Peter's laugh came easier than it had in months, and when Gwen reached across the table to tuck a loose curl behind his ear he forgot to be careful and felt the pulse at his temple hammer like a fist. Everything about the date felt improbable and true. They left the diner and walked under a string of streetlights that made the puddles glitter. They lingered on a corner, reluctant to end the moment. Peter wanted to tell her everything, about Uncle Ben's words that sat heavy in his chest, about the suit folded and hidden in his closet, about the nights when the city needed something that looked like hope, but he also wanted to protect her from the edges of the life he led. He chose the safe, ordinary thing. "I had a good time," he said instead, voice small and honest. Gwen smiled, the moonlight catching a corner of her cheek. "Me too, Peter." She placed a hand on his arm for a heartbeat and then, with the same casual grace that had carried them through the evening, she said goodnight and walked away, leaving Peter standing in the quiet glow of the sidewalk. He watched her go until she disappeared into a crowd of other lives and then he turned and jogged home with a grin he tried to keep from slipping into legend. He didn't know, of course, that a very different conversation was beginning across town, in a building that cast a deep, corporate shadow over the East River. Fisk Tower rose like a muscle-bound monument of glass and marble, and inside its airy offices the city felt smaller, as if everything were a component in a machine designed to generate control and profit. Wilson Fisk sat behind a desk the size of a dining table, his hands folded like curtains around his knuckles. He filled the room without needing to stand, an immovable presence in a room that radiated power. Mac Gargan closed the door quietly behind him and locked it out of habit rather than necessity. He didn't bother with pleasantries. He'd come here because Jameson's check had bought him something more important than loyalty, a foot in the door with a man who could pay X100 for results. He set a thin leather folder on Fisk's desk and slid it open. Inside, the blueprint lay flat. Clean, technical lines that sketched a carapace of armor, a segmented tail, a compact power unit, and the anatomical adjustments that would let a man move like an insect but hit like a freight train. Fisk's face, normally a mask of measured calm, creased just enough. Did that idiot Jameson actually give you the money? He asked in the blunt way of a man who understood transactions as truths. He wanted to hear the yes. He wanted to know that someone else had bought into the plan so the burden of risk would be shared, or at least that someone else would take the fall if things went wrong. Yes, Mac said. The single word came out like a promise and a threat. He wrote the check. You wanted me to be direct, Mr. Fisk. You gave me what I asked for. Fisk steepled his fingers for a heartbeat, then nodded toward the diagrams. Mac leaned forward, voice dropping into the kind of low timbre that doesn't ask permission. This is the prototype. Scorpion suit. Armor built to take a beating, claws and tail reinforced with a compact kinetic unit. Think of it like a stinger that punches through anything the city throws at it. We build this, we let me loose, and I'll show him, Spider-Man, that not all animals are the same. Fisk's interest was a hand on a prayer. You want to fight him. I want to show him what an animal does when cornered, Mac said. He under his words. I want to be poison to his heart. I want him to understand what fear actually is. Not the show he puts on swinging through the air, real fear. The kind that comes when you can't hide behind a mask or webbing. He tapped the blueprint with a blunt finger. You fund the suit, give me the go-ahead, and I'll make sure Spider-Man stops being a problem for your operations. There was a cadence to Mac's certainty that left no room for moral pause, and Fisk listened like a man harvesting a path that had always been intended. If I do this, if I sign off, will it kill him? Fisk asked, his voice steady because the question was a business one, and for Fisk, business was always factual. Mac's smile was cold and sure. Yes. Definitely. There will be no coming back from a hit like that. The suit will make sure of it. He folded his hands on the blueprint as though closing a book. Fisk watched him for a long moment, the city thrumming below as if the world were continuing without the weight of their choices. The man in the chair inhaled the controlled breath of someone used to deciding other people's fates. He could feel the scales tilting toward a new order, one where his interests would never be threatened by a masked teenager with too much conscience and not enough sense. Good, Fisk said.
Hey, happy sandwich day!
Fisk said finally. Proceed.
Blood.
Mac left Fisk Tower with a lighter step than he had when he walked in. The check
All right, hey, good news, bad news, everything in between. The good news is there is no bad news. But the bad
Mac's
news
smile was cold and sure. Yes. Definitely. There will be no coming back from a hit like that.
For today, but especially today. And then tomorrow, remember, I'll be at the district office all day. So one of the things I want to make sure we get a point of doing is in the last several minutes of class, show you what you're doing tomorrow so there aren't any issues. And it's gonna be on paper, so that's good, for those who like that. It will involve one little map, so you would need to use the internet, probably to help there, but that's about it. Otherwise, everything else is on paper. Wednesday and Thursday, we're gonna come back around and do some stuff with Lewis and Clark.
That. The suit will make
Friday
sure of it.
quiz. Now, the quiz is gonna go back a little bit, check some Adam stuff, as well as what we covered today with Jefferson.
It.
And,
He folded his hands on the
couple
blueprint
funny
as
little
though
videos,
closing a
not
book.
like slapstick, you're gonna roll, but
Fisk
they are
watched
funny.
him for a long moment, the city thrumming below as if the world were continuing without the weight of their choices.
And then next week, guys, the off Tuesday for Veterans Day.
The man in the chair inhaled the controlled breath of someone used to deciding other people's
And
fates.
then after that, you only got one full
He
week
could
in
feel the
November
scales
left,
tilting
so
toward a
this
new
month
order,
goes
one
by
where his
super
interests
fast.
would never be threatened by a masked teenager with too much conscience and not enough sense. Good, Fisk said finally. Proceed.
Alright, I'm not about to read all
Mac
these
left
little
Fisk's
passages.
tower with a lighter step than he'd had when he walked in.
You know, the president has wanted so desperately to win the Nobel Peace Prize.
The check from Jameson burned in his coat like kindling and the blueprint burned brighter, a map to a destiny he planned to make personal. In the elevator, his reflection in the steel doors looked like someone already wearing the suit. Wrapped in armor, tail arced, eyes narrowed to kill or be killed. The thrill of that image moved through him like electricity.
And he's claiming it's because of persecution of Christians. Now, I don't know that there
Back
is,
on the
there
sidewalk
isn't.
under the diner's neon, Peter made his way home with his chest full of small, ordinary joy. Gwen's laugh, the comfort of a shared milkshake, a hand brushed against his sleeve, and he did not yet know the shapes being carved in laboratories and private rooms.
But here's the thing.
He did not yet know that the city's shadows were gathering teeth and wiring, that men were spending money to become monsters, or that his simple decision to keep a promise would force him to stand against things other people would rather forget. He reached his apartment building and paused to look up at the night. The stars were small in the smog-tinted sky, but for a second he felt like the luckiest, loneliest person in New York.
Since we're doing this, does anybody want
He thought a man may asleep in the next room, of Uncle Ben's lingering voice, of the unseen and uncelebrated moments where one person had to choose right over easy.
Concepts, which you'll
He
see on
smiled,
Friday, so it's
bitter
not
and
like
brave.
there's a lot of info. We're not even
Across the
finished
city,
early.
in rooms with different views but the same intent, plans moved forward. Engineers put heat under metal casings. A tailor sketched line work for a suit that would pry at Spider-Man's edges. Men with names like Gargan practiced snarls in empty mirrors and counted out the ways they would end a young
We're
hero.
gonna start off in an unconventional manner, maybe.
And somewhere in the quiet hum of
Alright,
Fisk
there it
Tower,
is, Thomas
the businessman in
Jefferson.
white sat back and
$2
allowed himself
bill,
the small
which you can
luxury of
still use, but
certainty.
they don't make anymore.
He had never liked Spider-Man.
Oh, you know,
Now
I
he would
think
make sure the boy's story had an ending Fisk approved of.
most people, when they get them, they just keep them for collectors, that is.
The night closed
Alright,
over the
guys,
city
once
like
you
a
look at
clean
the screen
fist,
beside
and
you,
as the
Dan
lights
Thomas,
blinked off
couple
and then on
questions.
again across the
One,
skyline,
has
the
everything to do
narrative
with where we're going.
moved,
One,
inevitable,
just a little
merciless,
story
toward the
else
moment
you
of
guys
collision.
know. What is agrarian? Do you know what that
To be
means when you hear the
continued
word
in
agrarian?
Spectacular Spider-Man #1
Oh,
asterisk.
she's a little yeah, exactly what it is. Jefferson